السلام عليكم جميعا، كيف الحال؟ ان شاء الله طيبين. طبعا هذا البودكاست بيكون كلام للاسف مش في الكهف الاسود، لان بنصور زوم ميتنج مع دكتور برودريك شافيز. في اسئله وايد نحن نبغى نوضحها اكثر. الحلقه بتكون باللغه الانجليزيه. بترجم سعيد ولا لا؟ بنحاول قد ما نقدر نترجم، ولكن بنوصل يعني رساله باللغه الانجليزيه، واللي حد ما فهم ولا شيء ان شاء الله نحن انا ودكتور خالد بنقدر نساعدكم في الجواب عن طريق الدي امز ولا عن طريق الكومنتات تحت.
بس هذا الكهف الابيض،
هذا الكهف الابيض. هذا اذا سويت دنجن بس كله حق ناتيز بيكون كله ابيض، عرفت؟ اوكي دكتور برودريك, we miss you. Do you miss us too?
Absolutely. By the way, I just changed my audio method. Does that work okay?
You hear? Now it's good. Now it's good. Yeah. Okay. Okay, Dr. Broderick. For the guys who don't know Dr. Broderick Chavez, we already spoke a lot about him. He came to the dungeon. Doctor, you can go ahead. Just give us a brief about you.
You guys do this to me every time.
I'm sorry. Yeah.
I'm the villain. I'm the drug coach.
Okay, that's what that side we want to hear about, the team evil GSP side.
All right, really quick summary. I must confess, I really find this frustrating and difficult. But lifelong competitive athlete, lifelong enthusiast, which led me to being competitive in sports, which led me to rubbing shoulders with some high level athletes, and more importantly, some high level intellects. And those people, between my athletic prowess and my intellectual prowess, pushed me to be very competitive, both in sports and in my acquisition of knowledge. And that acquisition of knowledge led me to pursuing biology, both in my own time and, of course, through early developmental school. That led me to university, which led me to an undergraduate degree in biology, postgraduate degrees in assorted things that I then later applied to sports performance. And there is no such thing. It's not a real thing, but I consider myself essentially a doctor of sports performance.
I see. Yeah, that's more than enough, doctor. Thank you so much. And shouldn't be frustrating for the next time. It was very simple. Okay, doctor. Me and Dr. Khalid, we from all the videos we've watched you present, and from the seminar you gave us in the dungeon, we have a bunch of good questions. And me and doctor, we don't give any questions. Like, it's very precise, because we know you love language, and your questions should be the way you want it to be asked. So I'm gonna give the mic to doctor. He's the one who's gonna give out the questions. You're gonna answer, and then we're gonna need clarifications if we do need.
So Dr. Chavez, I mean, I want to do it like more systematically, starting with, let's say, training, nutrition. Then we can talk about PEDs, like just a brief stuff about training and nutrition. You know me and Abdullah and a lot of the guys, actually, a lot of the junkies in the gym, we always discuss about how much protein do we need, not only in bodybuilding, but let's say, for example, like 2 weeks ago or maybe 3 weeks ago, we had a guy who's a runner. He's into endurance training. And he mentioned that he's taking like almost 2.5 gram per kg protein. And then we had that sort of discussion, me and Abdullah and the guy, regarding how much protein we really need. And I think Abdullah, he tried on himself and some of the athlete, the amount of protein. How much are you using?
The minimal, like
the minimal.
I've been around 1.5 also. I know that you, doctor, you're a big fan of Lyle McDonald's, and he recommends something around 2.2 to 3.2, and that makes sense. And on practical real life, it does make a lot of sense. But I know we're not trying to get the optimal number here, but we are trying to know what's your point of view when it comes to protein intake for anaerobic athletes, resistant training athletes.
Well, the first thing I would say, and again, it does come down to that language concept. The first thing I would say is there's a very big difference between what can work and what I think is the correct answer. The reality is the human species is phenomenally adaptable and has a phenomenally broad spectrum of capabilities. In reality, people could probably survive and perform all their base biological functions with almost no protein.
Makes sense.
And then the other side of the coin, from niche populations around the world and keto dieting and assorted other things, we know that people can live on almost exclusively protein. So the reality is, the answer is anything. What I'm trying to find is what is the most appropriate answer for enhanced hypermuscular performance athletes.
Yes.
So when I give an answer, I'm giving that answer, which is doubly specific in the pantheon of what's available. But to answer it in that form, I would say that what we need to discover is what is the minimum requirement, and then not so much what is the maximum potential, because we know that that's almost infinite. So the reality is we just don't want to fall below a lower threshold. And everything I've found, ranging from RDAs or government recommendations around the world to, as you mentioned, Lyle McDonald's protein book, where he covers almost all of the major relevant nitrogen retention studies. And it just consistently looks like that lower number is about 2 grams per kilogram. Lyle defined it actually as 1.8. I just took the liberty of rounding that to 2, and I think that's a very reasonable number. And interestingly, and I do love to point this out, historically, the classical 1930s, 1940s 1 gram per pound is shockingly close to that 2 grams per kilogram. It's just, I find it kind of obvious and ironic that as soon as people started lifting weights, that's the number that just distilled out of practice. So it's very much the number I'm going to be comfortable going with, is a base number of 2 grams per kilogram, and essentially an upper limit in my application of about 3 grams per kilogram.
Sounds good. So, okay, you're taking that into consideration, resistance, competitive athletes. Let's say putting into that statement, enhanced athlete. Does that make a difference now?
Yes, 100%. Let's remember that the major mechanism of action of androgens, anyway, is to improve nitrogen retention. So it's the kind of common language interpretation of that would then be efficiency. So it might well be accurate that a natural athlete does need 3, 4, 5 grams per kilogram. But with the improved efficiency of exogenous androgens, that number comes down, not up. Most people would think, oh, because I'm taking steroids, I'm growing so much faster, I would need more protein. Well, the reality is taking steroids essentially frees up more protein. So by not changing your protein intake, you are getting more protein.
Makes sense. That's what makes sense to me, and that's what on application in real life I've seen. I mean, I've seen the best, as you said, people get adapted to. To me, keeping more space for carbohydrates as a source of energy is way better to maintain a good volume of training and workout.
That's my second question. Yeah, go ahead, Dr. Chavez. I mean, the thing is, let's say somebody like an off season or even in a prep, and you found out his performance is not improving or maybe declining. So let's say, can I sacrifice a bit of his calories from proteins and add some carb just to increase his performance?
I'm afraid I'm having a little hard time hearing you. Not in any technical way, just volume.
So let's say somebody in off season, or let's say maybe more of the time in a prep competition, right? And you found out, I mean, he just told you that his performance is not improving, or let's say is not as it good to be. Or let's say he's not improving as you expected, or as he expected. My question is, can we sacrifice some of the calories from the protein to add in some carb to increase his performance?
Again, first I'll pick on your language, then I'll answer your question, much more specifically. You said, can they? The reality is, yeah, I'm a genuine believer in freedom and free will. I think you can do anything you goddamn want. The reality is, now, is that a good idea? What I would say in that scenario is, first of all, when there's slow progress, I would look at lifestyle first.
Right.
Under the heading of lifestyle, which could be, job, recreation, all that stuff, even the daily design, where the workout falls in the day, all that stuff. I would look at all of that. Then a subcategory of that would be nutrition. A lot of times people, especially athletes, actually have their nutrition correct. They have more or less their drugs correct, and they almost certainly have their training correct. But what they fail to consider is the integration of their day, and that's the hang up in their progress. But in this argument, I'll default to the idea that the problem is diet. The problem is nutritional intake. In that case, I would say we have that range of 2 to 3 grams per kilogram. I would then start to meticulously explore that. Wherever they're at, let's say they're at 2.5, I would immediately jump to 3, explore that for 4 to 6 weeks. If I didn't see a change, I would move that to 2, explore that for 2 to 3 weeks, while always re-equating calories. So if I went to 3 grams, I'd lower the carbs a bit, raise the protein a bit. Calories are the same, but now more nitrogen biased, and then flip it the other way. What I find is if there's really a difference there, and I'm going to be honest with you, most of the time there is, but if there's a difference there, usually what that difference is the athlete's innate insulin sensitivity. People that tend to be a bit less insulin sensitive do tend to at least believe, if not in reality, bias a slightly higher nitrogen, slightly lower glucose, simply because that's the kind of efficiency of their metabolism.
But we'd always go back to the thermodynamic law. It's calories in, calories out. That's what makes the big difference. Yeah. Distribution of macros is a non-ending discussion that's been going on for a while, and then we always go back to the number one starting point, which is just calories in, calories out. That's from what I'm believing. I may change my my thought by just leaving this place. I don't know. I change my thought every day, doctor. Even when I speak to you, I change my entire brain sometimes. So this happens all the time.
That's healthy.
Yeah.
Well, if I could speak in there, first of all, the idea that you change your mind regularly is the most healthy thing I've heard an athlete say, because that is what science is. I see these little goofy internet memes where, people are, one day we'll all agree on the same, we'll all be evidence-based, we'll agree on the same shit. The minute we all agree on the same thing, science is dead. Science is dialogue. Science is assorted perspectives, competing and communicating for a collective outcome. So the fact that your opinion changes daily, to me, is essentially the most healthy thing I've heard of an athlete say in probably the last year. So that's really good. And then as far as just ultimately it is calories in, calories out. That's accurate. But that also means that there's a lot of gray area to play with under the hood, which is also healthy and interesting.
Yeah, makes sense. We jump into the next question. Sure. Let's not do nutrition because it's boring.
Yeah. No, that's it. That's for the nutrition, because we had a lot of discussion. I mean, let's say about how many proteins.
Maybe that's the only thing Ahmad can relate. The natty boy. We have a natty here, doctor. So whenever you want to pick on someone, we have someone here.
They brought me just specifically for that.
I haven't had enough coffee to deal with that yet.
Okay. This is your modafinil today, doctor. This is your modafinil. Okay.
So next exercise we talk about. So Dr. Chavez, there's a lot of nowadays. A lot of people talk about splits. Some says bro splits. Some says upper lower body. Some says push pull leg, and some says it's like a new thing, right? Probably it's a full body split.
Yeah.
I'm trying to formulate the question a better
way. We're not trying to get an answer of what's the best, doctor. We're trying to get an answer coming from you, that it's not about I don't know if you agree with me, but it's not about the split. It's about the volume of training. It's about like the overall energy expenditure throughout the week.
I think a better way of you structuring it is trying to understand how can we structure the frequency, the volume, and the intensity better in terms of getting
exactly. Yeah. Like coming from you, just give us your overall perspective about splits. Like splits and volume of yeah, because it's been going on for a while. Like people are just arguing on push-pull legs. Oh, let's do pro split. No, this is better. This is not better. So let's get it from you.
Okay. Well, the first thing I'm going to say is a very blanket statement, and quite honestly, probably the most offensive thing I'll say in this entire podcast, which is probably pretty profound because I'm genuinely offensive at every turn. But I sincerely think that training is the least important variable in this conversation. I don't joke. I literally think genetics are most important. I think that pharmacology is next most important. And honestly, those two might be in reverse order, but I'll go with genetics, pharmacology, nutrition, training, and lifestyle. And those two might be in reverse order. I sincerely think that you must train to progress, but the variety and style of, I sincerely think is probably the least, not probably, I think it's the least important thing. Now, that said, that doesn't mean I don't value training. It doesn't mean that I don't ponder this thought of what's the ideal split, that sort of thing. So I'm definitely going to answer your question, but I just want to give you the perspective that I sincerely don't think it's the thing people should be dwelling on. So having said that, I think the number one thing is for instance, under the heading of nutrition, we talked about ultimately it comes down to calories in, calories out. I agree. I think everything ultimately comes down to that base concept. In this case, total volume. I think total volume, total amount of weight lifted in a week, month, mesocycle, whatever unit you want to break this into, I think total volume is number one consideration. The next consideration, I would say, is the ratio or transposition of effort to frequency. The harder you train,
is that intensity?
More interval there will be between training sessions. So if you're training very, very hard, whatever language you want to use, whether it's RIR or proximity to failure or whatever the fuck you want to measure it, basically, the more effort you put into sets, the further apart the sets will be in terms of frequency, and vice versa. The less effort intensive you apply to the training, the more frequent. It's literally the same as sun tanning. If you go out in the sun for 10 minutes, you can do that twice a day, every day for the rest of your life. If you go out in the sun for 10 hours, you can do that once a week because you're going to be fucking burnt.
Yes.
There's no difference.
Makes sense.
So, and then there's one little kind of nuance to this. And this is where I can't give you an answer. I can give you a direction. And that is individual people in terms of their own, not just physical genetics, like, oh, yes, my chest is nice and full and I have good insertions and origins. I have a nice round muscle belly. Yeah, that's a thing. But then there's also sort of this emotional or psychological buy-in. Some people just really like training and then insert thing, biceps, triceps, chest, whatever. And that emotional buy-in oftentimes sort of subconsciously affects the quality of the training, both good and bad, and that affects the inroad, which then adds or removes to the frequency. So I would say it really comes down to what, and again, this is neither my idea nor new. I first remember reading about this from a guy named Pat Casey, who was an American sort of bench press specialist back in the middle 50s. And he talked about body part mapping, where he would basically perform a workout that he would write down a workout and he goes, that looks like a good workout. I'll do that. And he would do that and then essentially record, oh, I was sore for 3 days. I was tired for another 2 days. And then I repeated it on the 6th day, 7th day, whatever. And he felt that he was developing a map of his recovery and then went forth with this idea, thou shalt train chest every, make up a number, whatever the answer was, 5 days. And then he would do the same thing with back. He go, well, but I can only train back every 8 days, but I could train legs, every 3 days. In his case, it was probably because he didn't like training legs, didn't train them very hard. But nonetheless, he just did this map, and then just simply the split became the map. As I often talk about, steroids not being a course, or not rather a cycle, but a course. That's essentially what he was doing, was plotting this course based on how frequently he needed to pull over and refuel on his journey, if you will, to continue the metaphor.
Probably, I'd say this is the best strategy to map out your best training split. Yeah, it's like by doing this thing that you just said. Yeah, like do it on yourself and then see how it goes. It's purely individual when it comes to training. As you said, people can emotionally get attached to a certain workouts, and that really comes down to each and different individual. It's very unique. So yeah, when it comes to training, there's a lot of gray area. And when you say, doctor, intensity, is there a way we can measure that? No, or it just comes to, like, I don't know, subjective.
The first thing I would say there is that, and I'm sincerely not criticizing you. I'm criticizing that word is used wrong. Intensity in sports, people have come to equate intensity with effort. If they're trying hard, they're being intense. The reality is that is not the accurate definition of that word. You can go down to the hardware store or the, whatever. I'm embarrassed to say I was there, and I don't know you're cultured enough to go. Where would you go to buy, for instance, a light bulb? You go to the store that sells light bulbs, and
Yes.
there'll be regular incandescent bulbs, there'll be LED bulbs, and then in a little separate section, there's high intensity light bulbs. They are extra bright. They are high intensity. It does not mean that light bulb is trying really hard. It means that the light bulb is extra bright. Intensity is the amount per unit time. In proper physics, intensity is load on the bar. A heavier bar is more intense than a lower bar. It's not how much effort you apply to that bar. That's not the right wording. So I'm just being pedantic because it annoys me that word is just really used wrong. But to answer the question you've asked is, how can I measure my personal intensity or effort applied? The reality is there is no device in the cosmos that can measure. And more importantly, your own personal calibration is in flux. On a day that you are particularly tired or emotionally exhausted or whatever, your perception of how hard you're working will not be the same as a day that you wake up ready to take on the world. So even your highly tuned, highly practiced perception isn't very accurate. So rather than talking about how would I measure that, my suggestion for measurement to that would be historical record. You keep a logbook and you have performed this, so you know this can happen. Never mind whether you assigned it a 1, 2, 3 or a 27. You can do this. And anytime you can do more than that, you know that your effort is, if not going up, your progress is going up. So it's very unlikely your effort's going down. And then anytime your performance is going down, you can say, again, not necessarily that my effort is going down, but my performance is going down and something needs to be adjusted. Right. I think people have put too much onus on trying to wave the banner of I'm working hard instead of waving the banner of I'm making fucking progress. Right. I would rather somebody sit around look like they're napping in between sets and make progress than somebody that's wheezing and laying on the floor and gasping like a guppy, but not making progress. At the end of the day, I'm paid to generate progress. So that's the thing I want to track is are you not getting bigger, stronger, faster, whatever your thing is. And anytime you're not, that's when I intervene. I don't care how hard you think you're working. I don't give a shit. I've never met a person that thought they weren't working hard, even when I thought they weren't working hard.
So the thing is, as long as you're getting better, that's the most important thing, I would say, right?
It's amazing how you just spoke on behalf of my brain. For the last 3 months, I'm trying to figure out someone says this thing, and you just said it the right way. And it makes me sad that for the past 4 months, whenever I open my Instagram, just new doctors are fighting over iliac pull down. Like, I'm like, oh God, please, not again. So thank you so much, doctor. Thank you. You just made it so simple, and you made it more fun going to the gym. Like when there's no restrictions, it's more fun. Just go and enjoy it. Done.
You know what, Dr.
Let's not
Chavez?
talk about workouts anymore.
I'm not going to talk about workout, but Mount Dog, he just said, I know the studies that supports higher frequency during a week is better, but you're taking away the fun part of the workout. Yeah. You want to do a split that you enjoy, just do it.
I'm going to come back to the high frequency thing in a second, but all three of you have more or less, kind of nodded your head and agreed. Let me also phrase it this way. I sincerely believe that doing something less than optimal that you love, and therefore you apply with your legitimate heart and soul, generates more results than doing something optimal, but you don't like it. You find it contemptible and detestable, and you just do it. I think not just think, I sincerely believe the buy-in of I like this. This is for me, and this is the way I should be doing this. I think that sort of personal connection and commitment to the training you're doing not only makes the training better, not only makes you more compliant and effective, but then I think it also drives you to refine it. So when you started out, yes, it might have been a little bit suboptimal, but because it's now imbibed with sort of you-ness, both you and the training sort of evolve as your physique or your performance or whatever the thing you're trying to develop, as it progresses, you as a body, you, the training and the methodology, maybe even your training partners, and in some cases, maybe even your coaches, all sort of advance collectively. So I think there's a huge amount of value in that sort of buy-in and sort of commitment to the program. But then going back to the high frequency thing, aside from is it optimal, is it suboptimal, do you like it, do you not? The thing I find most interesting about training frequency was a paper that I saw referenced in a Medvedev textbook. I never could track down the paper, but there was a reference to it in terms of, not sort of the scientific notation reference, but simply a passing. And as they found in that study, whatever, Medvedev made the suggestion that the higher the frequency of the training, the shorter the interval of exposure, recovery, and adaptation. And because of that contracted time course, that the detraining was actually faster as well. Meaning the higher the frequency you train, upon cessation of training, the faster the frequency of getting smaller and weaker. And interestingly, I've found that very true in my sort of just life, life of coaching. I've found that the less frequent, now obviously there's probably a lower limit, but the less frequent people that train body parts once per week can go weeks on end without training and not regress nearly as fast as those people that train every other day, every third day. Those people seem to lose their progress much faster. And I find that really interesting.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that's more so because of the fact that their volume is more split up throughout the week. So let's say if you stop training, your volume is going to come down by a bigger percentage. Let's say if you jam up all your volume in one session, if you go, let's say, a week or two without training, you haven't really regressed all your volume in one go.
Probably, yeah. Probably that's a strong point, yeah. Let's head into the
bread and butter, doctor?
To the peanut butter and jam. See, we don't forget. Whatever analogy you give, doctor, it's always here in my brain. Even the sun tanning. You did not give us a sun tanning thingy in Dubai.
No.
We missed this. You owe us this analogy, doctor. You're not hearing us well, yeah?
I'm having a little trouble hearing you. It's morning is budding, and there's a little bit more noise in the background. I apologize.
No worries. I think we need to increase our voice, huh?
Yeah.
لازم نرفع صوتنا. Okay. Anyways, let's get into the peanut butter and jam. Yeah. بسم الله.
So, Dr. Chavez, we talked about in the lectures. I mean, you talked about in the lectures the thing about periodization. So we do, let's say, for example, somebody who's on off-season 6 weeks course. I'm not going to use the word cycle. I'm going to use the word course, as you stated. So you go 8 weeks, you keep increasing the doses, and then let's say you stabilize the dose for the other 8 weeks. Now the thing is, if somebody comes to you, his previous cycle was a total of 2 grams of like different things, and then he went into, let's say, a TRE of, let's say, 250 tests for like 3 months, and he got his lab test. All is good in his lab test, and he wanted to push again. So how do you approach these guys who had like a previous history of doing high doses?
I'm afraid I don't hear you just in terms of volume. I apologize, but I just can't quite hear what you're saying.
قرب ايوه
Let him speak into your mic.
احضان بعض.
Can you hear me now, Dr. Chavez? Yeah. Okay. So let's say, just an example, because we talked about the periodization in your lecture, Dr. Chavez. We do like an 8 weeks escalation, and then 8 weeks we continue with that dose, and then depends on the case. So let's say a guy who comes to me or to you, previously he took like 2 grams of PEDs, and then he went like on TRT for like 3 months just to recover his lab back, and he comes to you with his lab is normal now. So how do we approach this guy knowing that he was on 2 grams 3 months ago, and let's say he needed that 2 grams to grow? How do we map the escalation for him, let's say?
All right. Well, again, I'm going to answer you, but first I'm going to remind you that every time we talk about a thing, it ultimately comes to that total calories in, calories out, right, total volume. It always comes to that first global concept. So you're looking at that and saying, well, from a global concept, it took 2,000 milligrams to make this person progress.
Right.
That's actually wrong. It took 2,000 milligrams to make that person grow in the environment they were in momentarily.
Mm-hmm.
Again, that's like saying, well, because I only, at the top of my training cycle, I squatted 800 pounds. So anytime I squat 600 pounds, I'm underdoing it. That's inadequate. No, 800 pounds would kill me at the beginning of a training session. 800 pounds is only the correct answer in the final week of the final phase of the final anything. So again, you need to think of it that way. It's not how many milligrams are required to grow ever. It's how many milligrams are required to grow now. Mm-hmm. So if they're at a base TRT, HRT, sports HRT value of 300, it's reasonable to assume they only need 300 plus X, Y, or Z to grow momentarily. Now, admittedly, that momentarily will probably be pretty transient. So to answer your question, what I would do is exactly that. I would make that 16-week block with the 8-week center line, midline, and I would put at the midline, again, approximately that 2 grams. And then week 1 of the 16, if week 0, if you will, the final week of the bridge, we'll call that momentarily week 0. If week 0 is 300 milligrams, I might make week 1, let's say I'll just make up a rough number, a 30% increase. So 400 milligrams. So week 1 is 400, and week 8 is 2,000, and then relatively speaking, smoothly escalate based on compound selection and what have you. So it would go, 400, 600, 800, etc., up to the midline. I probably actually have to be a little faster than that. But so again, it's not so much you need 2,000 milligrams to grow. It's that person needed 2,000 milligrams to grow at the absolute peak of all of their convergent training, nutrition, pharmacology, psychology, recovery. At the absolute peak, they needed 2,000 milligrams. That doesn't mean every minute of every day they need 2,000 milligrams. That's insanity. Or at least I view it as such.
Makes sense. Just about. Yeah, it's good.
Yeah, that's it clears it up, Dr. Chavez. Now, you want to talk about your case?
Let's keep my case at the end. Let's go through the kind of, it's not general questions, but let's go through the questions you have.
So, Dr. Chavez, regarding estrogen and the renin-angiotensin aldosterone system, because we're not sure sometimes, is it estrogen causing the water retention or the RAS system causing the water retention? Because
I know there's a lot. It's a multifactorial
it's a
thing.
multifactorial
Yeah, there's a
thing.
lot of stuff causing that thing to happen. But we don't want to point the finger at one thing and say, oh, this is this. But we just want to know where is the case, where is the largely scale coming from?
Could we also touch upon training from here, just to involve a little bit of the nattier guys?
The first thing I would caution you there is water retention is a very generic term. In clinical medicine, typically when they're talking about water retention, they're talking about actual reduced renal function. They're actually talking about reduced ion clearance at the distal tubules of the kidneys. And that's a very good and relevant, accurate definition as it applies to congestive heart failure and the sorts of things that hospitals and emergency rooms would deal with. When you're talking about water retention in terms of athletes and particularly PED users, you've got a much more smeared out concept of what you're talking about. There's water retention in terms of actually skewing intracellular fluid values, as in cytoplasm. Now you've also got the concept of visceral water retention. You've got sub-Q water retention. Even to some degree, increased blood volume is by definition a variety of water retention. So when you say, drugs or estrogen or, angiotensin or this, whatever the thing you're going to talk about is causing water retention, you really have to define the compartment of water retention you're talking about. And then to make this conversation even triply more complex, and you've sort of just dialed into the idea of estrogen as being the culprit for water retention. I am of the belief that you're right. Estrogen is the sort of prime mover in that conversation of water retention, but not in its own right. I really don't believe if I gave you estrogen tablets, you would suddenly puff up and gain water. I really believe that estrogen's role in the water retention, as athletes think of it, is actually more of a synergistic concept. It's estrogen and its role in the somatropic pathway. It's estrogen and its influences on the brain and therefore signaling to the thyroid complex. It's estrogen's impact on angiotensin receptors and how they distribute ions and so on. So I really think, yes, estrogen is sort of the culprit, but it's through all of these pathways of synergy. And this is why I think people like me have a job, is to try and very carefully diagnose what pathway is actually driving the water retention. So rather than just crushing estrogen and go, all right, turn them all off, they're all bad. They're not all bad. I think it's more a matter of get estrogen to a lower but still robust and sometimes even supraphysiologic value, and then only address maybe it's estrogen plus this much growth hormone generates that much water retention. So now we have a play of, do we want to lower estrogen or lower growth hormone? Lowering growth hormone usually makes people go like, ooh, I don't want to do that. But maybe that's the right answer. Yes. So again, I wouldn't necessarily make estrogen the evil. I would actually almost kind of make it's the mover, and sometimes you just move it a little too far.
Yeah, makes sense. Yeah, so basically, getting from your answer, we're not trying to point out the fault on anything. It can be a cause of many stuff, and it comes down to how you want to puzzle it out. Like, you want to keep estrogen, you want to lower it. Yeah, it depends on. Yeah, it's a very case depend. Very good answer.
Yeah, and we just mentioned that estrogen is very beneficial as well, just like you mentioned, Dr. Chavez.
That's absolutely. Skin quality, hair quality, cardioprotective, buffers the lipid profile. improves joint health, or it actually improves is probably a bad language. I would say helps support or maintain joint health. And one last thing, estrogen is actually very, very vital in aggression. Most people have this sort of binary thing where they think, testosterone's masculine and estrogen's feminine. But the reality is, women can be quite aggressive.
Exactly. Yeah.
At least the ones in the Western world. I don't know. Maybe you guys have a different environment, but women can be rather aggressive. And aggression is largely driven emotionally and physiologically by estrogen. And I find that plays out very much in men as well.
Yeah, that makes a lot of. There's one thing you mentioned, doctor, when you were back in the dungeon. You said that a good amount of estrogen, or let's say a good ratio estrogen to androgen, can also help in the supercompensation phase of utilizing carbohydrates.
100% universally, you will find that the athletes that's too aggressively and or too early, which I would put in the category of too aggressively, suppress estrogen, never properly, if at all, carb up. They never supercompensate. Many of them don't even ever refill. They just go from very flat to mildly flat.
Oh, I see.
And I universally find that estrogen is the missing element there, which is why I won't rehash it here unless you really want me to, but it's why I spent so much time talking about that strategy of, rather than overly suppressing or eliminating estrogen, more of a scenario of sort of replacing it, supplanting it via the tamoxifen modality, where you create a lull in estrogen, then fill the gap with tamoxifen, which is sort of a false estrogen, rather than just crush it to zero, because I universally find that athletes never feel well and they never look quite right in the absence of estrogen.
That makes, I can definitely relate to that by seeing athletes with very low estrogen cruising into a show and athletes with high estrogen cruising into a show. Maybe complementing estrogen, complementing tamoxifen, as you said, Norvadex would be a very good thing to do if you want to neglect the water retention part and then just keep that good features of estrogen still available. Doctor, I've had a couple of cases where I see guys with I wouldn't say it's a low hematocrit level, but it's somewhere around 42%, 41%. I don't know if you consider that kind of in the lower range. In that case, would using compounds like equipoise that increase red blood cells and hemoglobin, would that be a smart move to do? Because I've done it. I don't know if that's I've done it based on he has low hematocrit levels. But what's your take on that? As it's more anabolic than testosterone. I'm not using it instead of testosterone. I'm just using it as a testosterone base and just getting that extra anabolism out of it.
Well, do keep in mind that was the intention when Ciba Pharmaceuticals was developing Boldenone, the drug that's now Equipoise. They were developing it originally for the human market, and its intention was to be a Dianabol depot, and Dianabol, its clinical application was hypogonadism. It was an androgen replacement. So what you're talking about is literally what the drug was intended initially. Now, admittedly, they curtailed that and moved the drug into the veterinary market, all of that. But you're literally using it the way the original conception of that drug was intended. And I think that's a very, very good approach. The problem I find with doing that is the manufacture of red blood cells is a slow process. In the best case scenario, it's a slow process. It's very energy intensive. And red blood cells have a long lifespan. They have a lifespan of 100, 120 days. And so I think what you're doing is a very good idea. The problem is drug taken today doesn't fully manifest that elevation in heme and in hemoglobin, red blood cell count, hematocrit, etc. That doesn't manifest for maybe as much as 3 months down the road. And athletes, and again, I'm not accusing you, but I'm just saying as a blanket statement, athletes are very now. They take the drug, they take a measurement, they go, didn't work. They take the drug, they take the measurement. Oh, it didn't work. And they forget that it isn't supposed to work now. Well, it's in a sense, it is supposed to work now, but it works now for the payoff later. So when using a drug like that, you have to have a sort of a 3-month foresight of what I'm doing now is really going to manifest in 60 to 90 days down the road. But if you're doing it that way, you can get a lot more anabolism, a lot more red blood cell production, lower estrogen over time. But you just have to have that mindset that the results are sort of 60 to 90 days behind the drug course itself.
Makes a lot of sense. Speaking of the 19 Nor family, the non-masculine family. Sometimes we do get a hard time to know when to implement this 19 Nor testosterone, especially when we are good with a good ratio of androgen to estrogen, and we've found a good good number of testosterone and a good number of, let's say, DHT, derivative of testosterone. And then we want to know when to implement 19. I know it's like some people say, whenever I get a joint pain, I'm going to use 19 Nor. Some people say, whenever I'm trying to find a better anti-catabolic drug or whatever. But is there a point in let's say, let's speak of a contest prep. Is there a point where you feel like 19 Nor is very critical to use?
I would never say critical because people are sufficiently different. Training methods are sufficiently different. I have met people that just never have really ever had a need for 19 Nor derivatives. I certainly can say with a straight face, I've explored them, but in practice, I've really never used them significantly for any reason because, again, I'm just the sort of person that doesn't need them. So I would never say, that vital thing. What I would look at is, again, a timeline. And as calories are going down, cardio is going up, your risk of repetitive use joint injury is going up with training volume. Your risk of physique flattening and sort of what I think of as wasting is ever going up because your calories are going down. So I would say if you look at a timeline of prep, and even if you don't use my numbers, whatever you use, whether it's a 20-week prep or a 16-week prep or a 60-week prep, I don't care. But what I would say is in the beginning, they're probably much less relevant. And as you get closer and closer to that flattened, wasted over dieting, they become more relevant. So I would, instead of thinking even maybe it's just the 19 Nors as a topic, I would just say drugs that bring volume get more and more relevant as the other things that lose volume get more and more relevant. So as cardio and training are going up or calories are going down, the desire for the relevance of 19 Nors goes up. So I would just kind of put it on a timeline, probably more relevant to get the training benefits out of DHTs early and more relevant to get the volumization of 19 Nors later and sort of a transition in the middle. And how fast of a transition is more about how fat were you when you started, how do you train, how hard are you dieting, etc.
Then when is the application for 19 in off season then?
Like an MPP, for example.
Now there it really comes down to what does your base physique need? Again, I'll use an example. You're a good example. We've never worked together as coach and athlete, but I've met you. I've stood in your presence. I've even watched you train. I would suspect that you are at heart, at your core, sort of a skinny person. You would not be round or even fat. You would be kind of stringy and skinny and thin. Therefore, your physique's weakness is sort of volume. So I would say someone like you would probably find a good groove with a 19 Nor to fill you out, give you roundness and size that would give you more leverage in the gym, more cushion against your joints, adjust a sheer higher body weight. Therefore, you can eat more calories and all that. Now go the other direction, and let's say you met Mircea. Mircea if left alone, could probably actually achieve fatness. He could get fat. His body has sort of an innate roundness. He's not stringy and skinny and emaciated. So probably a lot less relevance for a 19-nor in the off season. If his body tends in the presence of calories toward roundness, we don't want to give him more of that. So he's probably more of a DHT off season, whereas you might be a bit more 19-nor friendly in the off season. And again, it's not about, is it a good drug or is it a bad drug? It's a matter of, it's a drug that does this. Do you need that?
The right tool for
That
the right
really
job.
all comes down to is that right tool for the right job. When you start an off season, you should have in your mind, I need to do this.
Right.
And whatever this is should then determine which column you shop in. If I need to get rounder and bigger and fuller, 19-nors. If I need to get more fitness and capable and be able to run longer and play my sport longer, that's probably center column. If it's I need to stronger, that's probably more of a DHT. So it's really just a matter of what are you trying. Again, the tools you take determine what you're trying to fix.
Right.
Like it'd be ridiculous if a carpenter turned up at your house with a cement mixer. Like carpenters don't do cement. That's stupid. You need the tools you need. So again, what are you trying to build? Take those tools to the job site.
Makes a lot of sense. Yeah. Let's get into thyroid. Go ahead.
So, Dr. Chavez, let's say somebody in a competition prep and he's dieting hard now. And then he did some lab tests and he found out his free T3, free T4 are low. And he started implementing thyroid hormone. Now, the question is, do we need T3 and T4 to be super physiological, or we just need them to be normal?
To complement your normal range or to be over normal?
You've really opened a Pandora's box with that question. So what I'll answer it is in sort of three layers. I would say the first thing you need, and I don't like the word need, but my way of thinking is the first thing you would want is at the absolute worst to not be subclinical. You don't want to be supra or subphysiological.
Right.
So the minimum thing you want is to maintain values. But remember that normal values are going to work normally. Most athletes are not really very comfortable or happy with normal. Most athletes want considerably better than normal. So I would say just from a functionality point of view, maintaining clinical, mid to upper reference range values are vital to the outcome. From there, I would say whether you want to be top of the normal reference range, and I did use the word normal, and that's really important, or if you're truly enhanced and want to operate at a supra physiological value, I would say you need to accomplish that, again, by definition, you need to be above the reference range. Supra is above baseline. So I would say you need to look at this sort of more as a where do I see myself in terms of aggression to the goal. If you think you can get to the finish line normally, then maintain normal values. If you think you need above normal abilities to perform an above normal task, then you want to be there. And then if you are a pro in terms of outcome, then it's going to require significant superphysiological values. So again, I would kind of say if you're dieting for your first show, maintain normal values. You're dieting for a national show, you're probably going to want to go above the reference range. If you're prepping for your first pro event, you better be leaning the shit into it.
I've never seen a blood lab work that has a super physiological thyroid function. Did you see that? It's either low or within the clinical range. I was never high. I was high.
You were high.
Really? Okay. شو وقتها شو قلت لي؟ Like
I'm trying to figure out how to answer this. I've made them that way. I mean, athletes have come to me and I'd be like, I've laid out basically that conversation. Like, where do you see yourself? And they're like, oh, I'm the top tier. And I'm like, well, then we need to apply the drugs to get you to where you want to be.
Oh, I see.
Now, what I will agree with you, that number's a little more aggressive than most people might think. You take 100-kilo bodybuilder, that's nothing compositionally like a 100-kilo Gen Pop person. So a 100-kilo Gen Pop person can probably maintain physiologic T4 values with 75, 100 micrograms. To get a 100-kilo lean prepping bodybuilder into super physiologic ranges, you're probably looking at twice that in terms of take it.
Okay, that's
so technically Abdullah's wasn't high. It was normal for someone that big.
oh no, it was super physiologic. It was high.
Yeah, it was higher. Than
Okay,
normal.
okay. In my case, and then what I did, I don't know if that's a right approach to do that. So we stopped T3, yeah, doctor. We stopped T3. We stayed on T4 for a while at 100 mgs, and then dropped down to 50, and then from 50 to 25, and then started using supplementations like selenium, and then
zinc,
iodine,
yeah.
stuff like these. Is that a good way to do it with someone who's coming out of a thyroid function?
I do think so. I am very much not a tapering, titrating, PCT minded sort of person for your kind of classical PEDs, testosterone, anabolic steroids, etc. Thyroid, on the other hand, the mechanism of the feedback loop is tiered in such a way that, yes, I do think a titration over time is ideal, and I do think what you did is very much the correct. Is, you know, when you're at full contest prep, the first layer you drop is the T3, then you titrate down the T4 to a baseline. But the other thing I would remind you, and I don't want to sound like, like, oh, you need to just commit to drugs and take drugs forever, but I will point out, and I have an ulterior motive, and I'll point that out second to the statement. I will point out that, you and everyone like you, i.e., hypermuscular, drug-driven, hypermuscular, your body weight and composition at that weight is so atypical that I wonder if a 0 T4 environment is ever quite the right answer. Again, you weigh, 100, 105 kilos. Yeah. Your 105 kilos is so biased to muscle mass that I wonder if your thyroid is ever fully capable of supporting the amount of metabolic needs that you have. I think that I almost think there might be and I shudder to say this out loud because I'm probably going to start a very bad culture.
You want to say use T4 always, yeah. Yeah.
If there isn't almost a TRT where the T is actually thyroid. I wonder if there is a TYRT that needs to be in play to really utilize the pharmacology that we're trying to do. And now the reason I said there's an ulterior motive is I want to point out, and I really go out of my way to do this. I love to be smart and, I'm the smartest guy in the room. But the reality is also fucked things up pretty royally along the way. And one of the places that I fucked up is I, in my youth, had this mindset that the absolute least amount of drugs I can take is going to be the best outcome. I was committed to that belief. And so when my body weight started to climb in my teens and in my early 20s, I just did it with the minimal, not necessarily doses, but variety of drugs. I did it with testosterone and Primabol and at some later point growth hormone and insulin, but just those. And I thought in my mind, by not using thyroid drugs and not using supporting compounds, that I was helping myself by not exposing myself to additional drugs. Well, the reality is what wound up happening is my body weight reached such a level that just to maintain normal metabolism, my thyroid had to work so hard that it essentially broke down. And now I am thyroid dependent because I never released the workload that was applied to my thyroid. So in a way, I kind of created the very problem that I thought I was avoiding.
Similarly, you can talk about blood pressure, right?
Eat a ton of sugar, their pancreas wears out, not because they were flawed. They just simply overworked the organ. I did exactly the damn thing. I don't know if I ever could have avoided the problem entire, but instead of being thyroid dependent at age 30, I could have probably staved that off to 50 had I intervened, and I didn't. So I do think about that regularly.
Doctor, could you also say this, like something similar when it comes to blood pressure? When you get guys that are hypermuscular, these guys are obviously going to be a lot heavier. So similarly, the trying to support it naturally might not be the best idea.
Well, it's interesting you would take that position. I would agree with you to a degree in that you're 100% right. Larger creatures just have a disposition toward higher pressures, hydrostatic pressures, and therefore blood pressure. 100%. But I would say also the training volumes required to achieve those higher body weights should concurrently come with a higher level of fitness. I have definitely worked with Olympia caliber, very high body weight individuals that really sincerely had no need for hypertensive medications. I think that is much more of a, if you need it, yes, use it. But I really don't agree with the idea of just proactively, almost in my mind, unnecessarily treating hypertension where it doesn't exist. And I have two reasons for that. I have three reasons for that. One, again, even though I've been proven a little bit wrong on the base level, I still think the less drugs you take, the better off you are. Two, I really think that people are under the impression that these drugs are universally safe, and that is not accurate. Angiotensin drugs, particularly ARBs, ultimately skew blood potassium, and other drugs athletes take, insulin, etc., also skew potassium. I think that's a bigger problem than people are willing to.
Even nutrition. Some people that even nutrition there.
I think this is the most important one. Anything that lowers blood pressure will ultimately lower performance, and I think that some people just kind of tank their performative capabilities by lowering blood pressure, and then it actually creates almost a negative feedback loop. They're taking an ARB they might not need, or only marginally. It lowers their blood pressure. The lower blood pressure lowers their performance. Then they take stimulants to train harder, which just create transient peaks and troughs in the damn blood pressure that they were trying to stop in the first place. And I think that cyclical therapy is worse than just letting it alone and trying to develop some real fitness.
I thought telmisartan and ARBs are like purely therapeutic pills that should be used by default. But you've opened my mind to a lot of stuff now, especially that potassium thingy. It may also lead us to arrhythmia. Yeah, even us as bodybuilders, eating a huge amount of calories. I'm pretty sure we're eating a good amount of potassium too. So maybe that will also complement with the amount of total potassium in your electrolytes.
And then not that it's my protocol, but a lot of people in that same demographic might be using short-acting insulin. Short-acting insulin will create the potassium shift, moving substrates from plasma to cellular and cellular to plasma, and those potassium shifts could cause short-term transient cardiac stresses and short-term transient renal stresses that I sincerely don't think are healthy.
Oh, I see. So I'm not trying to say what you said, but are you saying that don't use ARBs, let's say telmisartan, if you're using short, long-acting insulin?
I wouldn't say don't use. What I would say is just simply
that's what I'm
don't
doing.
be so cavalier and have this assumption that because it's prescribed to old people, it's just safe. Drugs are not safe. the safest drug we have can still fucking kill you. Don't just act as if drugs are somehow your right and they're ubiquitous and they're safe. Put a little thought into it and know that drugs always have consequences, and sometimes those consequences overlap. And the overlap is usually, I mean, as a doctor, the gentleman to your right can tell you that, unintended drug interactions are one of the number one killers in medicine.
Right. Yeah. That's why we need to know the patient history, like knowing his drug, what he's taking actually.
Yeah, sometimes the more we use, the more we fall into I won't call it a deep shit, but more variables you have to deal with. Yeah, the more stuff you have.
Just like you mentioned, Dr. Chavez, I mean, we're trying to avoid taking drug to protect us from other drug we're using.
Yeah, just let's keep going on and on. Yeah.
Won't stop.
Yeah. Okay, I think after this podcast, doctor, I have to send you my protocol because I think there's a couple of stuff I am not using well. Okay.
Absolutely. I would love to have that chat with you for a whole bunch of reasons. One, I'm always interested in trying to help. But secondarily, again, what we started this conversation with, science is about dialogue. Even if you hear the things I have to say and you reject every one of them, fair. I think just having the conversation will make both of us more aware, more interested, and more interesting. I just sincerely believe that science is about dialogue. So 100% we should talk about that. 100%. Yeah. And even if you hate everything I have to say and you never do any of it, hearing it will make some little light up somewhere, somewhen, and that's good.
That's great. I don't know if you guys have any other questions. We've kind of reached around 2 hours speaking. I'm pretty sure if we keep on talking, we'll continue till 5 hours, doctor. We had even 3 full days in the dungeon, and I feel like it wasn't enough. So if you guys have anything else to add.
We're good.
Yeah, it was a very nice general talk about.
It's a great excuse to have me back sometime soon.
Yeah, definitely. This will happen for sure, 100%. Yeah, so... thank you so much, doctor, for letting us have a podcast with you, and hopefully we'll have you soon again in the dungeon. The guys loved you here, and as we said, we're always very excited and very passionate about whatever you're trying to give us from knowledge. It's very we really appreciate it. Thank you so much, and that's it. Good luck in Florida, and see you soon, inshallah.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Dr. Chavez. Bye bye.
شكرا يا شباب، نراكم على خير ان شاء الله في حلقه اخرى من الكهف الاسود. طبعا دكتور برودريك يعني يدوم يخليك يعني تيلس روحك وتفكر وايد لان تضيع. ما شاء الله منظوره في كل شيء مختلف عن اي بني ادم ثاني. يعني انت تشوف مثلا الميكروفون هذا شيء، لا هو يشوف الميكروفون من تحت، بالعكس يشوفه كل شيء. وفي النهايه يوم يقول لك ان منظوره هو يخليك تضيع صدق. يعني مو تضيع ان انت يور لوست، لا تضيع انه تفكر وايد، يعني يخليك تسال عمرك مليون سؤال فعلا ليش شيء. فسبحان الله، وهذه المتعه في البودكاست هاي، والمتعه في بودي بيلدينج بشكل عام دكتور، صح؟ ان كل ما اختلفت الاراء، كل ما مو اختلفت الاراء يعني تعال اعطني من جيبك، لا اختلفت الاراء بيست على منطق ولا مبنايه على ايفيدنس معين. شكرا لكم على المتابعه. الناس ما قلنا لكم بنحاول نترجم، قدرنا ما قدرنا كان بها. واذا الريزولوشن تعبان تحملونا، هذا اول مره نسوي بودكاست بزوم ميتينج. تمام يا شباب، لنا حلقه اخرى ان شاء الله بتكون في الكهف الاسود مع ضيفه هالمره بتكون ان شاء الله. ترقبونا ان شاء الله على خير. سووا سبسكرايب، لايك، و فولو ذا جايز. عماد ما تكلمنا عنه وايد. عماد is we speak about you soon ان شاء الله, more podcast, but we had to get someone else just to have another perspective from the natty world, but seems like the natty world is very hard to get in. But one day ان شاء الله. Anyways, thank you guys. نراكم على خير ان شاء الله.
Take care, Dr. Chavez. Bye bye.
Bye bye, doctor. Thank you.